We're now going to open up for Q&A, and you can put your hands up. We've only got 10 minutes. I'm going to ask Professor Picker to pick a hand, and because it's very hard for me. So, Colin, if you want to pick out some questioners, and they can ask some questions.
Just to ask you, could you tell something about what's happening with your graduates? How many of them do practice law here or internationally? And really, what's happening with them?
Well, at UNSW, about 50% practice law when they graduate, and it decreases to about 25% after about 10, 15 years. And that's because I think people often go into the law and discover that actually there's other ways they can contribute. They might move into the media, they might move into banking, there's all sorts of areas. There are so many different branching paths that they go on. And it's also true in Australia that law degrees are often different to, say, the United States. You do a law degree typically in the US to practice as a lawyer, whereas here many people do a law degree because they want to be a journalist and they think it's useful to have law and a second degree with it. So it's a real variety of occupations, but it's about 50-50 at the moment.
What I would say in answer is, I'll tell you what I tell students that are looking to study in their families. I say that when we teach in the law program, we're teaching communication skills, problem-solving skills, innovation, entrepreneurial skills. We teach about business, we teach about government, and if they want, they can go on to become a lawyer. So that's a recognition of these facts, the stats that George said, which apply to us as well. About 50% of our students go into law, and a decade later, it's significantly lower. So, and I don't consider that a bad thing at all, given what I really believe we're teaching our students are the qualities that they need for leadership in their community, in future professions, and in business, skills for life. So I wouldn't be out there pushing it and telling them if I didn't believe that this was really a fantastic thing.
And your international students, do you monitor international students, what's happening with them?
Yeah, we do quite closely, and interestingly, our international students have the highest employment rates of any of our students, particularly those who speak Mandarin. And there's such a fierce demand for Mandarin-speaking students that we have firms from New York and London that fly to Sydney to recruit our students. Because if you're, say, running a New York office, you need to have Chinese people who have a Chinese background. It's the language in part, but the critical thing is what they're looking for is Chinese cultural affinity, plus language, plus then a Western legal education, so that you can work in a Western market. And the demand there is tremendously high, and it's why so many students come from China and elsewhere to Australia, because they see that as a hub, an education hub for the world. You come here and then you can go almost anywhere, because the degree is so widely and well regarded that you put those combinations together and it's extraordinary opportunities.
What I would just add to that is that UNSW, actually like Wollongong, is also accredited in India, for example, and our degrees are able to be used in most of the common law jurisdictions without too much of an effort, often exactly the same effort as local students. So our international students have great opportunities, actually.
Now, who else would like to ask a question? I'm sure Colin can pick them up. Good.
Thank you. Very interesting talk. When you take your students to the short courses overseas or the short visits overseas, are you working with other universities and other students connecting with students from the other universities? And then do you also bring the students or students from those universities come here so there can be that cultural exchange continuing?
Okay, I can almost answer for UNSW as well, because
you set them up.
I set up many of those, including the one that Lucas does in Santiago. In fact, he set it up with me. It's all of those. Each program, typically around the country, there's a lot of these programs. They're all different. Some involve directly working with local students in the same class, such as Lucas's one in Santiago. Some, it's during the break, the holiday break, and so local students aren't there, but it's local teachers. I think they always have a host relationship, and they're often elite institutions, such as Berkeley or the University of Zurich, and so on. So it's all of those things. The variety of programs today, it didn't exist when we were at law school, is just amazing. They're really lucky. I wish I could go on them.
And they're really, really lucky. To give you an example of our most recent one, it's in Pune in India. And there the students go and spend 2 weeks at a law school there. It's interesting, it's a female-only law school in terms of the teachers, and it was set up in order to break what was a very male domination of the Indian academic profession. So they spend 2 weeks in a class with local students there, and then they actually do programs. So they go out into the streets in India and actually provide advice to women who are in need in India. And as you can imagine, they see some pretty confronting situations. And the experience they have there, again, is quite extraordinary. And they've come back and their eyes have just opened. These are often quite privileged Australian kids who, having spent 2 weeks in India, partly in the slums in India and with an entirely different cultural background in the classroom for 2 weeks, suddenly their whole career trajectory is changing about what they think they can do.
So when they come back to Australia, do they have an opportunity to develop further that social justice theme through communities practice or within your law schools, student societies?
Yeah, there's lots of different ways. It might be a pretty typical path is they might go and do one of these exchanges, and then maybe they might do another exchange if they want to. They can go for 6 months is an option, or there's also a lot of internship possibilities. So we partner with, say, the New Colombo plan. We have a lot of students who get those. They then spend a period in Southeast Asia. We're particularly prioritising Indonesia at the moment because we think in terms of relations and exchanges, that's where I think Australian law schools have not done enough in that area. I had a good visit to Indonesia last year to build some links there. And so they'll go and do that, and then they get into the employment context where the employers are saying, we'd like someone with this sort of experience, and they can say, I've been to that country, done this, work with this group, and it's a really good leg up for them.
Thank you.
Well, I must say, George, I took one of your former students to be one of my assistants in Geneva. I took a lot of students over 6 years. He got the human rights bug, went to New York and did an LLM, and then was heavily involved in making the Colombian peace process possible. So you never quite know where students end up.
No, I think we've got another question at the front too, Ron.
Okay, please go for it.
Very interesting talk. My name is Grace. I'm from UK's law faculty. We are in the role looking after the faculty's international development. I totally agree with you on various things that you've talked about, but I see a lot of challenges as well. So today I'm going to ask you about your opinion on two different challenges. Because of the time limit, I'm going through my first challenge to Professor Williams and then my second challenge to Professor Picker. So at ETS, we do see a growing number of international students coming to study with us. And as you mentioned previously, with our local student, they came to law school with a very high, ridiculously high ATAR. That means we have two quite different cohort, especially in the undergraduate level, where we have perfect English-speaking student with extremely high ATAR, and we have some very smart international student, but their first language might not be English. I want to ask you about if there's anything particular that you've done to improve the class engagement of these two different groups. As we're moving along on a more interactive class learning and teaching model, these become quite important.
Can you say the second one very quickly, because we have to finish at 25 past?
The second one is about mobility. Professor Picker mentioned about the mobility program. That becomes quite common in all the law schools in Australia, which is a very good thing. But in my experience, most of our law students are keen to travel to USA or the UK instead of Asian countries. Is there anything that you've done to encourage them to travel in the local region?
Thank you for a good question. I think, gentlemen, I asked you to be fairly quick, not too quick.
Sure, I'll be quick. And quickly on that second point, interestingly, our highest demand locations are Beijing and Shanghai. So it's actually Asia now has displaced the US and the UK. But on that point about challenges in the classroom, it's a particular challenge for us because we don't have any lectures. It's all small groups. And there's up to 20% class participation for every course. So they must speak. And we're unapologetic about that because we think that lawyers have to be able to communicate. They have to be able to communicate across cultural and other barriers. We often will offer particular support programs for international students. There's international advisors for those students. And we also are unapologetic that actually these students need to mix. It's not just the international students, the Australian students need to be able to communicate across language and other barriers as well. So this is the world in which we live. It doesn't always consist of people with perfect English, with privileged backgrounds. So we do see this as a challenge. There is more we need to do through support and other things, but a mixed cohort of students of great academic promise, but different backgrounds and sometimes different English, as long as it meets a minimum standard, well, that's the way we think we need to go.
And Professor Picker, you have the final word.
Okay, so as far as an answer to the first question, let me just point out, Lucas and I and 2 others wrote an article which is available on SSRN that's about these exact issues. I forget the exact title, but if you look up both of us, it's in the Journal of Legal Education. Is that right, Lucas? So we explore all those issues you asked in the first question with proposed solutions. As far as encouraging students to go not just to America and Europe, one of the things that I used to do when I was at NSW, any student going on mobility on exchange had to have an interview with me first, in which I probed why they were going where they were going and talked about what might be other options. And that had a huge impact in steering them towards Japan or towards other places. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Can I thank both professors?